Okay, so welcome to our slot. So over the next 30 minutes, Silika and I are going to talk to you and invite you into a very intimate conversation between the two of us about our experiences of rising to the top, if we can say we're at the top, but rising and progressing through our careers, our experiences at Sainsbury's, and hopefully really sharing some personal stories as we go. So please feel free to come down a bit to make it a bit more intimate if you wish to. So please.
It'd be great if you do come down a bit.
Yeah, come on. This is like a intimate conversation.
Get a bit closer
here.
and be with us.
Come on. Love this.
Thank you.
Come down. Fabulous. Yay.
Exactly, some familiar faces.
Come on, Sainsbury's people. Fabulous. Clicker. That's the bit we're missing.
Let me get that for you. I'm going to go and get the clicker. Let me get it. Let me do that.
Fabulous. Right. Are we ready to go? Perfect. Fab. Right, so what we're going to do is, before we even start, is introduce ourselves. It'll be rude not to. So, as I say, over the next 30 minutes, we will take you through a very intimate conversation between the two of us around our experiences, our journeys at Sainsbury's, but also more broadly in life, and hopefully give you some tips in terms of what it has taken us to get to where we have done today. So starting off, really, so I'm Sarah Nelson. I am the Managing Director of Sainsbury's for London. So I look after all of London's operations. So every store within the M25, all of our online operations and all of our kind of locals within the M25 sit with me. So that's about 20,000 colleagues, about 400 stores, just less than 400 stores within Sainsbury's. So really pleased to be able to be here today. Silika, would you like to give an intro?
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. So I'm Silika. I'm Silika Shellie Manso. I am the Director of Innovation for Product in the grocery part of the store. So Sarah's just explained what she does. Think about when you go into a supermarket, into a Sainsbury's supermarket, all of the Sainsbury's own brand food that you see, so over 30,000 products. I am one of the directors in the team that make sure that we have the product on the shelves that everybody loves to eat.
Thank you, Silika. Right, so we're going to just take this from the beginning, really, and just understand where it all started before we start giving you a bit more of an info in terms of our career. Where did it all start? So, Silika, give us a bit of background for you. Where did it start for you? What are the key defining moments that have helped to get you to where you are today?
I'm going to go way back to the very beginning, right? So just a little bit about me. So I come from a West Indian household. My mum was first generation St. Lucian, or third rather, and my dad was actually born in the UK, but from Jamaica originally. And from the very, very beginning, in terms of early childhood memories, there were three key things that really has stuck with me today. Food, yeah, so food really being at the heart of our culture, really being key to our household. Education, my mum was a headmistress and quite firm about the choices that I made at school. I was massively into arts, music, food, English, and from probably the age of 8 or 9 was steered down, you need to go out and to support yourself. You know, think about your choices that you make. You need to be in a business career. So education, really, really key. And then I think lastly, right, is just lots of love in terms of being very connected in a family with lots of relatives. And the one thing that kind of, the common thread through all of those things was being very aware, very early on, that I was a black girl and had to work extremely hard, in school, had to consistently talk about, you know, how well we were doing at school, what I was into, what I was doing outside of school. And I think that really, really set me up for now where I find myself in my career. So food, being very, very into food from a very young age. I find all of my 20 years of being in the career, which is across retail and across FMCG, so fast-moving consumer goods, I've always been in food and drink. So I think my early childhood with having those things really key to the way that I was brought up has really helped to where I've got to today. So what about you, Sarah?
Thanks, Salika. And actually, I was going to ask you to add just in terms of home life as well.
Okay, so home life. So I'm actually married to Richard, and I've got a 12-year-old daughter. And another thing that I think about in terms of food and education, I am of Caribbean or West Indian descent. I'm married to a West African. And so again, actually, one of the things that have been really, really key to our home life is diversity, right? In terms of my 12-year-old daughter really opening up to different cultures, both of our cultures, and really making sure that that's key to how she is developing life. But yeah, so living in North London, born and raised Londoner, just in case you couldn't tell from my accent. And actually, the only time that I've been outside of London was when I went to university in Leicester. Now, enough about me. What about you?
Thank you, Salika. Quite similar, actually, very oddly. So it all started for me, goodness, a very long time ago. I'm going to give away my age here. But so my parents are Nigerian of West African heritage. My mum came to this country at the age of about 19 on her own with big hopes and dreams of becoming some big business leader, senior lecturer. She wanted to travel the world and everything else. She ended up in Dalston, single mother, 3 kids in a council flat. So I was one of 3 of her lovely children, not any trouble at all. But yeah, things were tough. We had a really challenging childhood where we lived. And actually, for me and my 2 sisters, we actually really enjoyed our childhood. Although it was tough, we didn't know anything else, so we didn't actually realise how rough it was. We lived on a council estate, which they've knocked down now because it was so bad that it just doesn't exist. But, you know, it was something that really defined and shaped me and my sisters in terms of who we are today, and just really helped us to have that resilience. And seeing my mum work so hard because she stuck with her dreams, and she decided she was going to go to uni. She was going to get 4 or 5 jobs. We hardly ever saw her because she was working all the time. But she worked, you know, she was a cab driver at one point. Can you imagine being a taxi driver in the 80s? Like, I wouldn't even do that now. But she's like a real warrior, my mum. So proud of her. So, but yeah, she did all of those jobs. She did her degree, she did her master's degree, she did a PhD. She became her senior lecturer and business advisor, and she's worked with some amazing people and business leaders around the world. And so she's always been a big inspiration to me in terms of what exactly is possible. So that really shaped me and how I've kind of progressed and taken myself forward. And then personally, home life, very similar to Salika actually. So I'm of West African heritage, but my husband is of Caribbean heritage, so he's from Barbados. I have 2 kids who are, I don't even know if I can call them kids actually. One of them's 22 and the other one's 17. And so they are big kids. But yeah, so they've grown up with me and been part of my life along the way. So yeah, that's where it's all started for me, Salika.
Thank you. Right, let's go on to the next piece, right?
Ooh. Sorry. There we go. So I'm having a look at the slides. Being the only one in the room, shall we? So one of the key areas that we really wanted to talk about was what it means to be the only one in the room. And I think for us, within our career, and as we've risen to the top, being the only one in the room has been a really key theme. So what I wanted to explore with you, Salika, is when that first started for you, what were the earliest memories of being the only one, and how did that feel like for you?
And it's interesting because we have so much in common, right? You talk about being raised by a single parent, living in a council flat, if you like. Very similar for me. I grew up in the East End of London, and I can actually remember being the only one in the room, probably when I was about 9 years old at school. I'd always been the only black girl. In fact, there were 2 black children in my class. And I remember my first experience when it really dawned on me, actually, I'm in a really, really small group, is we were coming towards our final year, so I think it's year 6 now, so year 5. It was the 3rd and 4th year then, that shows you my age. And the teacher, the headmistress actually, was calling out people for the great work that they'd done, the accolades that they had. And I remember being sat next to somebody, either side actually, my 2 friends, Kerry and Kelly, and they were being called out for being great students, delivering really great work, really great quality work. And the headmistress said, "We know that you're going to go on and be at university. You're really, really bright. You've worked really, really hard." And then she came to me and she said, well, firstly, she struggled with pronouncing my name. And I'd been at the school since I was 4, and here I am now 9, 10. And she said to me, Silika, you know what? You've got great sporting ability. I wouldn't be surprised if you're going to go on and be an athlete. I mean, here I am, not even 4 foot, right? Quite rotund as a little child. And she saw in me that I was going to be an athlete. And I remember thinking at 9, wow, this is already how I'm seen and how I'm being perceived. I remember thinking, I'm seen very differently outside of my home than I am inside of my home. So that was my very, very first experience of being really aware of what it was to be the only one in the room. And it hasn't changed in terms of going through my career. What about you? I have to say, though, right, because that does sound quite challenging and negative, and it was a defining moment for me, but it's taken 20-odd years for me to be in my career and not be the only one in the room. This is the first time in all of my career that I've been able to sit next to somebody who I hold in really high esteem, who is a friend and a colleague, but throughout all of my journey at work and school, it was just me. So what about you?
Wow. I can't even imagine, sitting as a child and hearing that from a school teacher. I say I can't imagine, but yes, I can. So for me, very different. So I grew up in Hackney, right? So as you can imagine, my class in Hackney was very diverse. I had lots of black friends. I had friends from lots of different but different backgrounds, different colours of skin. But I wasn't actually aware of my colour of skin properly until my mum decided to take us out of the hood, effectively. She said, we're moving, we're not living here anymore. So at the age of 11, we moved to Enfield, a part of North London, which at the time was not very diverse. So I wasn't only the only black person in the room, I was the only black family on the street, on the road, in the shop. Literally everything was very, very apparent to me was the colour of my skin. And so very early on, in order to survive really, I found that I tended to adapt and try and think about how I fit in. So for me, it was a matter of surviving and saying, right, okay, how do I blend in, And it became a second nature to me for a very long time, to the extent that I didn't even realise I was the only one in the room half the time, because I found that I lost myself. And as I grew in my career, I continued to blend in, really, for a long period of time. And I don't know, so I really don't know if that, in some way, helped me get through some scenario to a certain level. I don't know.
So we're going to talk about that a bit more, right? Because it's definitely a theme that runs through in terms of this adaptability, this blending in, and when does that change? So maybe we move on to the next bit.
Yeah, so I think you're right. There's a piece around, we've been talking about blending in, and we've been talking about how do we try and kind of get our head down and not be seen. But actually, if we talk about being seen, it's the very reverse of what we've talked about, because although you're the only one in the room, you'd think you'd stand out. But what we've described is actually doing everything we can not to stand out. Okay. So for you, Silika, when's the first time in your career or in your life that you have felt as though you have really been seen for either who you are or what you bring?
As I said from the beginning, we've both said that coming from a culture which was get your head down, yeah? Work twice as hard and you'll progress by doing the right thing, fitting in and delivering really well. I did that for a long, long, long time. I worked in organizations that were big branded organizations whereby there was definitely a culture and I really tried to fit in. But once something happened, getting my head down really helped me to realize actually that I was actually good at my job. Yeah? It really helped me to realize that all those lessons that I'd learned from home in terms of working twice as hard, being really committed, there came a time where I started to be recognized for actually what I did. So my mum and my dad didn't really understand what I did, right? I was working for companies like Nestle, Walt Disney, Coca-Cola, job titles that never made sense. Actually, it's only now being at Sainsbury's that they can understand, oh, you helped get that product on the shelf, right? But I was able to, by really listening to my mum and dad, putting my head down, I was able to have some really good experiences, you know, really get the breadth in my career. And I think maybe 8 or 9 years into me developing my career, I started to realize that one of the things that I was good at was I really liked talking. I liked presenting. I liked engaging people. And I loved data, right? And I was able to tell a story, bring it to life, and do it in a way that was quite real. And as the only person in the room, I was remembered for that because they would come to me and they would say, oh, you were the girl that spoke about X. And I know that actually being black or being the only one in the room helped that to some extent because I was remembered. But now I started to be known as being good. And I had to really, really focus on those small little wins that I was getting that were helping to build my confidence. And actually, one of the other things that helped me in that, which I wasn't very good at naturally, was I learned this the hard way, was mentors, right? It's just having a network to really help me to take confidence in what I was doing, but really thinking about how I could start to be seen differently. So that was probably one of the defining moments in my early career where I started to understand my own power, started to understand my own value, but it was more about what I brought. It wasn't about who I was. They didn't really know me, but they remembered me for what I brought into the organization. What about you?
Yeah, so interesting. So very similar, Silika, for me. So coming from an African family, as you know, there's very limited choice in terms of what you can do professionally. So I decided very early on I wasn't going to be a doctor or a lawyer. But actually my background is actually accountancy. So my profession is an accountant. I've been working in accountancy for 20 years. And I went to uni and studied chemistry. And I think that was to make my mum happy, to be fair, because she wanted me to do medicine, and I was just like, okay, maybe if I just did science, that would keep her happy for a little bit. But everything I did and the culture that my mum had kind of instilled into us was just work hard, get your head down, work, work, work. Even if you hate it, just keep doing it. So I kind of got to a certain point of, right, okay, I'll do chemistry, finish that, do that and make sure that, you know, I've got that out of the way. I went into accounting and finance, which I enjoyed for 20 years. You know, I'm still an accountant. But actually, what I found is in my career, what I ended up doing, similar to you, is just working like a crazy person because I was told, you are black, you are female, you need to work twice as hard and twice as fast as anyone else just to be standing still, really. So I was seen, certainly in my early days at Sainsbury's, because I worked so hard. Anyone that knows me now knows I'm probably addicted to work, to be fair. But what I was seeing was for the hours that I put in, more so than anything. And again, very similar. I don't know that if my colleagues would be able to say they knew who I was. It was actually Sarah works really hard, and actually if you want to get something done, you give it to Sarah because she's going to smash it out of the park and she'll just rip it up and get it done. it wasn't necessarily, this is who Sarah is. And I think what's happened for me is the more senior I've become in my career, I've learned that what has got me to where I am today is not what's going to get me to where I need to be tomorrow. And that hard work looks and feels very different. And so I've learned that I need to be seen for different things, and just getting your head down kind of stops at a certain level. You've got to start thinking about how you rebrand yourself and how you work at, whether that's broadening your network, how you work at developing and understanding yourself, put in the same level of effort, but change what you're doing. And I realised that in order to be seen in the way I needed to adapt that. And similarly, the role of mentors and sponsors have been massive. You know, there's times where I've had people that have believed in me and have put me forward and pushed me forward more than I have myself. And these are people that haven't looked like me, and I haven't had very many role models in the workplace that, you know, that are black and are female. I've had none. But I've still had those really great connections and sponsors, especially at Sainsbury's, to really push me and my career forward. So one of the things that we wanted to really talk about was this concept of how we rise to the top. And actually, one of the concepts that we really wanted to explore is this concept of really playing big. And it's something that you and I have talked about quite a bit in terms of what that actually means. What does it mean to play big? What has that meant for you in your career, Silika?
So I think that, I spoke about being seen, right? Just really focusing on being really good at what I did. And I suppose in the beginning, I was really focused on how I progressed my career. Yeah, where the opportunities were going to be, how I developed relationships. And I realized that by building that confidence, by people seeing me, I then started to have I had a responsibility to make it not just about me, but to think about how I could use my influence. And probably a story about 10 years ago or so, I had been in the business for a long time. People knew who I was. And I looked around me, again, going back to being the only one in the room, and there wasn't any black talent coming through. There was no black talent coming through. And I'd grown up with this business. And so with the confidence, because they now know that I can do my job, I started to challenge in terms of, so what are we doing to bring black talent through? And actually, our system in the way that we recruit is never going to do that, because we're just going to the same place to bring talent through. And by the way, black talent isn't in the places that you're fishing from. And I remember having a conversation with a really, really senior person saying, I'd love to bring through young black talent, and I'd especially love to bring through young black men. We had a really, and the reason why I said a young black man was because there was a candidate who had applied for a job. He had a first-class degree in, it was a science degree, first-class degree. I worked for a food business. He was massively engaged with doing lots of work in his community. So he was working during the day at TK Maxx, and then in the evening, he was going to work in his local community, what do they call it? Volunteering. He's volunteering, right? And he was teaching disabled kids music, basically. He had so much to offer, and it's not often that leaps off of the page, and it wasn't being seen because of his name. Right? It wasn't being seen because of his name, and it wasn't being seen because of where he went to school. And the arguments that I had to have for him and somebody like him to be seen and to come through for interview is when I really realized I need to play bigger. This is not just about me. I now have built up my reputation. You know, I've been able to deliver success. There are people that are much better than me, and the business isn't looking at them. So that was really, I suppose, the first time that I really challenged the business to think broader, right? being really specific about we need to have young black talent come through. And I suppose because they had confidence in me and I was gaining confidence, I was able to influence and challenge in the right way. What about you?
Do you know what, Silika? I can completely repeat your story because I've had very similar experiences. So just feeling as though you're having to really try to push and actually get, you know, peers or colleagues or leaders to just look at talent in a different way. And as you say, search for talent in a different pool is definitely something that, you know, I've been focused on. So exactly the same. And being quite strong to really play big and speak up when you see something isn't quite right. Even if you're standing alone on that.
And it's hard, right?
Yeah.
And I'm sure like many of you, you've got your own stories. And we're going to talk about it a bit later, but you need to be resilient in that, and you need to have tenacity, because we've got many examples of that going back. And there are going to be many examples going forward as well, right? So it is the bit where you've got to have lots of energy and lots of tenacity to work through that stuff.
Definitely.
So we spoke about, you know, the first time where we felt like we had to do something for more than ourselves, right? But there has definitely been a sea change. So talk to me about, and you actually spoke about, the more senior you become, the job becomes different, yeah? Talk to me about what the kind of awakening moments for you were as a result or after George Floyd.
Yeah, well, actually for me, my awakening moment was way before George Floyd. So I had an experience at Sainsbury's where I had an opportunity to step out of my comfort zone. So I've already explained to you all that my background is finance. I'm an accountant. I have a massive passion for people and understanding how our business works. And the benefits of working in a business like Sainsbury's is that it's so broad. We have, you know, close to 180,000 colleagues, not just in our shops. I think people just think about the stores, right? You know, we have a store support centre, which is our head office, where there's so many roles. But actually, for me, I've been working in finance. That's my function. That's my profession. I really wanted to step out and understand what drives the numbers. I wanted to understand how they get there, not just report on them. So for me, an opportunity came up about 7 years ago where I could step out and be an area manager. And that's a leader that looks after the small convenience, the small locals, so those small local Sainsbury's that you see. So I stepped out in 2015 to do this, and I was very aware that when I stepped out to do this role, I was definitely going to be the only female amongst my peers. We've had very few at that time, very few female leaders doing those roles. However, I hadn't really thought about the impact, you know, my race would have on doing a role like that at all. So my very first day of stepping out and meeting my team of male store managers, I had one female store manager and actually one black female store manager in the room that day. I introduced myself, I left. I then spent the next week meeting up with all of these store managers. My meeting with the black store manager is what changed my life. She walked into the room with tears in her eyes, and she just walked in and she just kept saying, "Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you." And I was just thinking, what on earth is wrong with you? Like, I've not met you properly before. Like, have I given you a pay rise? I didn't realize what was going on. So I was like, just calm down a minute. What, are you okay? And she was just, "Thank you." Like, tears were in her eyes. And I said, what have I done? She said, "Thank you for walking into the room." She said, "I've been with the business for 11 years. And until you walked into the room, I didn't even think or know I could be or do anything other than what I'm doing today." She said, "Thank you." She said she went home that night and her husband was like, "What on earth is wrong with you?" She came home with a spring in her step, energy, all of this stuff. And her husband was like, what? Have you had a pay rise? Nothing. Anyway, that gave me goosebumps in the moment, because I was sitting here thinking, I'm just here to learn, do my job. But I had that sense of, do you know what, Sarah, this is more than just you getting some experience. This is about, you know, you actually inspiring and providing a vision and hope for others, especially when you're leading such large teams of thousands of people. people look at you and go, yes, actually, I can do this. People that had just given up and hadn't even thought they can do it. So for me, having that experience taught me that this wasn't about me, and I needed to do more and stand up within our business, within Sainsbury's, and really kind of push the doors open for many others. And that's exactly what I did from that day onwards. Without fear, without shame, without anything, I just said, look, this is the right thing to do, because I saw the performance that changed in her. She went into her store differently. Her performance of her colleagues changed. Everything around her, the standards around her changed, just because she believed she could do something. And I just thought, could you imagine if everybody turned up to work like that, believing that they could do it? Wow. So it was a phenomenal experience for me. So from that point onwards, which was years before this had happened, George Floyd, I just knew that I had to do something different. And off the back of that, I started off the I Am Me colleague network, which is for ethnically diverse colleagues, Black heritage colleagues, and much broader than that, to just try and make sure that every colleague in our business feels like they belong, feels as though they can progress, and has the right opportunities. So for me, it really transformed how I progressed within Sainsbury's.
That is so inspiring, right? And I'm sitting here feeling a little bit embarrassed because you had that moment much sooner than I did. This is what gave me that moment, right? It was, yes, pre-2020 with George Floyd, I knew that I had a responsibility. But this made me feel like, actually, there is so much more that needs to be done, and I have to be much braver than I've been before. So before, I had relied a lot on my success and doing things in the way that the organisations that I'd grown up would accept. This was the first time that I really came out of my comfort zone. Yeah, so you got there a lot sooner than I did, but this was the thing that massively changed it for me. We're going to talk about, there was a lot of talking that went on after this, and there were a lot of commitments that businesses made after this. And what I think we're both really proud of is being able to have those conversations in Sainsbury's, but really being able to drive some action, right? So I want to make sure, Sarah, that we've got time to talk about some of the great things that you've really helped the business to think about, and some of the great things then that the business has done. So should we move on to the next piece? And if there are any questions, right, like really make our life hard, ask us some questions, and I'm expecting some kind of tough questions, particularly around the last bit and this bit.
Fab, thanks, Silika. So I've already talked about the I Am Me colleague network at Sainsbury's, which is actually played a significant role post George Floyd to really provide support and to provide just a really safe space for colleagues to really come together and talk about how they're feeling and how we could really support each other through through the emotion of it. I mean, you all lived through it. And it was something for me that was really important that we worked together and with the business to actually decide how we were going to drive the business forward. We did a lot in terms of training our business shortly after Black Lives Matter, and it actually wasn't because of that. We were already working on a program called Let's Talk About Race, a really hard-hitting, eye-opening program with our HR teams, which we delivered to all of our senior leaders in our business, from the PLC board, operating board, all the way down to most of our senior leaders, to talk about what it's like to live as a Black and ethnically diverse colleague or person within the UK. So it's really eye-opening. We did a lot and through that actually, we actually created some confidence in our business to do things and be a bit bolder about how we market ourselves as a business and how we try and represent ourselves as a business. And one of the things we were really proud of was, you'll all remember the Sainsbury's Christmas advert that went out shortly after, and actually myself and some of my colleagues in this room were part of really thinking about how we get this advert right and supporting our marketing teams. And at the time, I remember Sam and I were having a lot of debate around, how do we get the jollof rice right? Is it Ghanaian jollof? Is it Nigerian jollof? What's it going to look like? Is the gravy colour right? We were doing all of that. Not really thinking about the backlash and the response we were going to get from the advert afterwards. And as many of you would have seen, the response we got after was quite horrendous. But to be fair, and sadly, we weren't surprised by it. And I had to do a lot of work with our marketing teams to just really talk to them about how we need to respond to it and how we need to be brave in our response to it as well. And really encourage them to think about the humanity around, what these concepts were and what people were saying, rather than trying to make money out of it. Yes, we had people saying they're not going to shop with Sainsbury's anymore, but, how do we respond to that off of the back of this? So the way we responded, and we won't have time to go through detail, but the way we responded and the confidence in which we responded as a business was largely supported by the support we provided as a network to really stand up and really just not take any shit, really.
And that was perfect timing for me, right? Because all of this work had been going on with Sainsbury's in the background for a long time. Like you said, this was before George Floyd and was really gaining momentum. This was when I was making a decision about going to another business. And all of my previous career was about what I brought. I got to a place where I started to think about, yes, what I bring, but I need to be me when I bring it. And what Sainsbury's did with the advert and with other things that I'd learned about made me really think, actually, this is the organisation that I need to move to next. So for me, that was perfect timing. And I know that's really recognised quite broadly outside. How are we doing for time? Because
we've got less than 5 minutes.
Right, I'm going to very quickly just end on this one. And hopefully what you've seen is, I suppose, a real progression that the business has been on, really helped and influenced by some great people. But the most recent thing, so, from the I Am Me network to the advert, now what the business has done is invested. So I think about all of my background, marketing, products, commercial, thinking about the customer, really thinking about food being a big part of my journey, was actually, we want to take it a step further, right? We are really passionate about food at Sainsbury's, and we really believe in offering great food and drink to everyone. But to do that, we know that it needs to be made by everyone. And today we know that it isn't, right? So I think we are testament of everybody in this room where talent is universal, but the opportunity isn't. So this is the latest thing that we're doing at Sainsbury's, which is investing £1 million to support black founders to bring through innovation in food and drink, right? Going back to great food and drink for everyone, but needing to be made by everyone. So we could talk about that for a long time, but we don't have the time. But hopefully that kind of gives you a bit of a flavour of what we're doing at the moment.
Fantastic. Thanks, Silika. I think we're going to try and wrap up. We've probably had a couple of more sections we're going to go through, but I think we will cover it through the Q&A. So we are going to go straight to the Q&A at this point, and hopefully we'll be able to get a bit more of our content through that as well.
Okay, so thank you. So we've got some questions. So the first question, as senior leaders in the corporate space, do you feel pressure to be the role models that you are? If so, how do you manage those expectations?
Great question. I wouldn't say, I think in my early career, I did feel pressure. I think I always felt like, this isn't just for me, I've got to be great. And actually the story that Silika gave, just in terms of trying to pave and open the way, open the doors for others. We had this conversation, funnily enough, on our way down. We always felt as though we do need to perform. We do need to make sure that we can give confidence to other leaders that, yeah, it's okay to hire more black talent. It's okay. And actually, feeling as though you're having to perform for everyone kind of sits on your shoulders.
All the time.
Yeah, definitely. So I feel as though that definitely sat with me a lot when I started to first make those steps up. I think now I'm a bit more relaxed in it, and I'm just like, I've got this, yes, I feel like I'm representing. For me now, it's about being the voice of everyone. It's not necessarily about performing for them. It's making sure that I can represent, if I am the only one in the room, what am I bringing to that room, and how do I make sure that I'm bringing the voice of my people to the room, you know? Otherwise, why am I here? So that's how it shifted.
And I agree with what you say. I feel an additional pressure, and it's interesting because I've been speaking to a couple of people outside of the room, is not only what we do in the day job, but doing this as well, right? Is that we have a responsibility to do this because we need more of us here. So that adds pressure because that's on top of the day job. You know, we're passionate about it. We are genuinely invested in it. But it does add pressure, and it's ongoing, and it's relentless, but it's necessary. So I feel like that's the additional pressure that comes in as well.
Great, thank you. And another question is, can you share some advice for graduates early on in their careers in how to build their influence? Also, related to that, is there value in taking initiative and taking risks, doing something that may not align with your manager's priorities?
Shall I take the first part and you take the second part? Because I think you've got a great story for the second part. You might want to build on the first part.
Okay, go on.
You do. In terms of tips to graduates, one of the things that I learned really late was the importance of a network, like building relationships. You know, we spoke about, you know, culturally, we have been taught, keep your head down, yeah, do your job. We're not taught as well about a big part of doing your job are the relationships that you create. Because to do your job, you need to be working with others. So a network for me, and really making sure that you are thinking about who can sponsor you. Yeah, who's going to be talking for you when you're not in the room? Yeah, who are those role models that you can look to? Where are the mentors that you can seek out? I think is something that's really, really key as a graduate to start thinking about that, because the more senior you become, the more important the network and the relationships is.
Thanks, Salika. And I remembered the story now. So in terms of, you know, doing something which may not necessarily align to the priorities of your line manager, I think for me, and an example that I was sharing with Salika was actually when I was starting up the network. So when I started up the IME network years ago, I was actually stepping up into quite a big role. So my day job was massive. And actually, I had challenges from my line manager, no longer with the business, who was actually saying, you just don't have time for this. Like, just leave it. You haven't got time. And actually, it's not a priority. As I say, no longer with the business anymore, but I was actually distraught by it because I was thinking, if I'm not doing this right, who is? There was nobody doing it. And I thought, as long as I'm working in this business, I'm doing this. And if I'm not doing it, then I'll go somewhere else that's going to allow me to. But this is important to me. But it meant I had to work harder in my day job. It meant I had to make sure nothing fell over, because otherwise it would be like, well, I told you so because you haven't done X and you've messed the accounts up and blah, blah, blah. You know, so it did put a lot of additional stress and pressure on me. But for me, when you've got that sense of purpose and you have a reason why it's important, I always say go with that with conviction. Obviously, you've got to work hard. You've got to make sure that you're doing your job. But don't lose yourself in it. Don't ever lose yourself.
And I think that's the great tip in terms of a graduate piece as well, just to kind of circle back, is like there's often where we're going to stand alone, right? And really focus on what the right thing to do is. It's kind of, we need to get comfortable with that. And I think that the last few years has definitely been a real necessity in terms of feeling better with that. I see some of the graduates coming through, they're a lot more vocal, a lot more challenging than I am, and I would say keep doing that.
Thank you. Another question from the audience is, what's your advice for building your network when you feel you don't have any common ground with your colleagues?
It's a really tough one. I think it's easy to assume you don't have any common ground on face value. But I think the more you reach out, the more you get to know your colleagues, even if they are from a very different background, I'm sure you will find something, something you can connect with. Having been the only one in the room all the time for a very long time, I found that one of the things that connected me to a lot of the all-white male room that I was in is I'm a massive football fan. Anyone who knows me knows I talk about football all day. So I would have a lot of football banter, but you would probably look at me and another and think, you wouldn't actually associate me with football, right? But you will find something to connect with. And I think the more you talk and be interested and be curious about people and really try and understand what drives them, what do they do outside of work, what are their passions, you will find something. I challenge you to find it.
And the way to do that is, and it's really hard, right, because COVID has changed that, but the way to do that is where you can informally. Right, is grab that coffee, invest in taking 15, 20 minutes just to have a conversation with somebody, because you get so much more from just having that informal conversation than feeling like you need to focus on how can I find the commonality.
Yeah, so I was just going to build. We do something called coffee roulette at Sainsbury's, and many other businesses may do it, but you kind of randomly kind of meet up with someone that you don't know, 15 minutes, half an hour, and just have a coffee with them. And it's surprising how many things that you'll find that you have in common with that person. So yeah, reach out and really try and form that bond.
Thank you. And I think one
more question.
Yeah. How do you personally manage to help and support colleagues in areas that aren't very diverse? For example, Wales has been mentioned.
What was that, sorry, for example?
How do you manage to help your colleagues in areas that aren't so diverse? And this person, Sunny, has actually mentioned Wales. So colleagues in Wales that yeah. Or areas that aren't as diverse as maybe London.
Yeah, so from my perspective, being a leader in retail, so I'm lucky I have London, born and bred, representation is fantastic, but I play a role in actually making sure that I can be a bigger, broader, visible role model across the country, because as you say, if you're in Wales or you're in Scotland, sometimes it's even more important that you have more visible role models and that you talk about diversity even more so, because they just won't get it. And therefore, representation is something that we really focus on nationally. I do think there's a massive part that we play in actually trying to make sure that there's role models in those remote places as well, so people can see people quite close to them that also, can actually inspire them as well. So we do a lot corporately as well, just to make sure that stories across the company are visible, whether that's through Teams, whether that's through our social networks. How do we make sure that we can reach people at the furthest end of the country and everyone has access to the same tools, should I say. So that's something that is really important to us, that we're not just London-centric or thinking about the big cities. It's really important that we can connect with everyone.
And the tools is really important, right? Because one of the things that we do at Sainsbury's is we make sure that the conversation keeps happening. And we find a way, there was a lot of work done about having big conversations. Now we're having smaller conversations. So we're talking about books that we're reading. We're talking about the films that we're watching. We're talking about the music that we're interacting with. And just making sure that we're having those conversations more regularly and with a more broader group. And just those small little things really helps in terms of broadening the minds, broadening the perspectives.
Great. Thank you very much.
Fab. Thank you.